Buenos días, good morning, buenos días a todas, a todos, desde Tarifa, desde la 20 edición del
Good morning,
Festival de Cine
everyone,
Africano de Tarifa.
from Tarifa,
Los
from
que
the
están en
20th
Tarifa y nos
edition of
siguen,
the
por favor,
African Film
reciban la
Festival
tercera
of Tarifa. For those of
mañana del
you who
árbol de
are
las
in Tarifa and
palabras en
are
nuestro
following
segundo
us, you
encuentro
know that
internacional
this is the
profesional
third
del
morning
Festival
session
de Cine
of the
Africano.
Palavotry
Para
in
los que nos
which
siguen
we are
desde lejos,
gathering
como nuestros
professionally and we are
invitados esta
having
mañana,
meetings. And for
muchísimas
those
gracias
of
por
you who
estar
are
con
following us
nosotros.
from outside, thank you very
Mi nombre es
much for
Federico
being with
Olivieri, soy
us
el
today.
responsable del Árbol de las Palabras.
My name is Federico Olivieri
Conmigo ya
and
están los
responsible for
ponentes y
the
el
Palaver
moderador de
Tree.
esta mesa redonda.
And
Hemos
the speakers
programado
and
para
the
seguir la
moderator of this
conversación
roundtable are with me today that has
queremos
been
continuar en
programmed
estos
to
días
actually
en
keep
la
on
ocasión
with the
de esta
conversation that
fecha
we
también
wanted to have
importante para
during the last
nosotros aquí
few
en Tarifa, que
days.
son los 20 años de un
Because this is a
Festival de
really
Cine Africano
important day for
en
us in
España,
Tarifa
y
because
en
we're
la que
celebrating the
tanto a través de
20th
la
edition
programación como a
of
través
an
del
African
Árbol de las
film
Palabras
here in
estamos
Spain. And through
ah,
the
explorando
programs
la
and
idea de
through the Palaver
patrimonio
Tree, we
cinematográfico
are
africano
exploring the idea
y la
of
idea de la
the
construcción de la memoria
African
cinematográfica.
filmic
Y
heritage,
por lo
and
tanto
the idea
hemos
of the
organizado
construction of a
este
film
seminario
memory is
virtual
so
con
important. And that's why
importantes
we have
expertos, representantes de
decided to
instituciones que
have this
trabajan para este
seminar,
fin.
this webinar with
Yo
experts and
simplemente
representatives
les quiero
of
dar
institutions
unas
who are working
nociones
on
del
that
funcionamiento
matter.
de este
I'd like
seminario
to give
antes
you now
de dejar la
some
palabra a
notions
Sebastián,
regarding how
que
this
es el
webinar will
moderador de esta mañana.
function before I leave the
Como a
floor
los
to
que nos
Bastien, who will
escuchan
be this morning's
desde
moderator.
lejos,
If you are listening to
hay
us
una función de interpretación
from far
abajo.
away,
I'm
you
going to
have to
say
know
this in
that
English
there
for those who
is
don't
a
understand Spanish
translation
as
or
an
interpretation
interpretation
option
option.
available.
In this webinar, you can choose your preferred language, English or Spanish. You will see a world planet-like symbol on the lower bar, so you can switch and listen to our interpreter. And we will let the panelists start the conversation, follow the conversation moderated by Bastián Castillo. Bastián Castillo moderará la conversación durante unos 40-45
And he'll be
minutos para
moderating the
luego
conversation during
recoger las
40
preguntas que
or
puedan
45
tener.
minutes, and then
Por favor, escriban las
we
preguntas en la opción
will
de
have a look
añadir
at the questions that
preguntas
you
y
may have.
respuestas
Please
y el
write
moderador se las
the
pasará a los
questions
panelistas
that
en
you
el
may have
momento
in the Q&A
oportuno.
session, and the moderator will
Muchísimas
send them
gracias de
out
nuevo a todos. Paso la palabra a Bastián
to
Castillo, nuestro
the
moderador.
experts. So thank you very
Sigamos
much
con
once
esa
again. I'll leave
agradecida
the floor
vida a
without further
nuestros
ado to Bastian Castillo, our
patrocinadores,
moderator. And once
la
again,
Agencia
I'd like to
Española de
thank
Cooperación Internacional para el
our
Desarrollo y el
sponsors,
programa CERCA que hacen posible
the
el Árbol
Spanish
de las
Agency
Palabras
of
y
Cooperation and
instituciones que
Development,
también nos
who
apoyan en este
make
año,
the
como
Palavetry
la
possible,
Universidad de
and the
Sevilla,
different
Goethe
institutions
Institute de
who
Madrid,
are sponsoring
Instituto
us, as
Camões
the University
y
of
el
Seville,
Consulado
the
de
Goethe
Portugal en
Institute
Sevilla.
in Madrid,
Muchísimas
Instituto
gracias a
Camões,
todos por
and
estar
the
aquí
Consulate of
en esta
Portugal
mañana
here
del
in
Festival de
Seville.
Cine
So thank you
Africano
very much
y
once again for being here with us
atentos a
during
la
this
conversación.
morning edition
Gracias.
of this African Film Festival of Tarifa. And well, this is about to start. Thank you, Bastian.
Muy buenos días. Gracias, Federico, por introducir este webinar.
Good morning,
Mi
everyone.
nombre es
Thank you very
Bastián
much,
Castillo.
Federico,
Les mando un
for
fuerte abrazo desde Tarifa,
introducing
donde
me.
estamos
My name is
celebrando
Bastien
la 20ª
Castillo,
edición del
so I'd
Festival de
like
Cine
to
Africano.
say hello from Tarifa
Un
because
placer
we're
para mí
celebrating the
contar
20th
con
edition
este
of this
festival con
African
ellos y
Film
para poder
Festival
hablar
of
un
Tarifa.
poco de
It's a pleasure
memoria
for me
y
to have this
también
panel
de
of experts
registros
among us to
cinematográficos
talk about
africanos
memory
desde sus áreas
and
de
also to
expertise.
talk about
Y
registries
para ello
and
quisiera
archives
introducir
because you will be talking from
con
your
una breve
areas of
introducción,
expertise. And that's
algo
why
que
I'd
nos
like
ayude a
to
poner en
introduce
contexto lo
a
que hemos
brief
venido trabajando
reflection
con el
of
árbol
this
de las
seminar.
palabras este
Maybe
último
this
año.
helps us to put in context everything we've been
Recordar es un
working on
imperativo
the
moral y
Palavetry
ético.
this year.
Hay pasados que no pueden ni deben dejarse pasar. El
Remember
tiempo es
is
interesante
something that
siempre
has
que
to be done. Some
estamos
pasts cannot be
inundados con
forgotten,
miles de
but
estímulos
the
audiovisuales
interesting times are the ones
que
in
se
which we're living
multiplican
because
cada día.
we are
Lo que vuelve
surrounded
más
by
difícil el trabajo de
an
continuidad en ellos,
ensemble of stimuli,
especialmente
and
cuando está
this
oscurecida por
gives
el despojo
even a
informativo.
harder place for having memory,
Podemos decir
especially
que hay un régimen de
when we
imágenes en
are
caída libre,
facing the
al mismo tiempo
decolonization.
una carrera
And we
contra el
can say
tiempo
that the
por recuperar
images
las que
are
viven
in a
frágilmente
free
en
fall,
zonas
and we are
inexorablemente
battling
líquidas.
against time
Con
to
espacios
get
como
back
estos
those who
queremos reivindicar la
live
defensa de la
in the
memoria,
celluloid.
ya sea
With
como
spaces
colección
like
de
this one,
filmes o
we
materiales
want to
cinematográficos
foster the defense of the
ubicados en el
archives
continente africano y
and
sus diásporas,
having some collections
porque
of
creemos que son
films
invaluables para
regarding
preservar la
the
relevancia histórica,
African
estética y
continent
cultural de
and
ellos.
its diaspora because they are very
Hoy es
valuable to
imperante
preserve preserve the aesthetic and cultural heritage of Africa. We have to face the political challenge when managing them. So this webinar is called precisely Protecting the Cinematic Footsteps of Africa, New Initiatives for the Preservation, Restoration and Protection of the Continent's Audiovisual Heritage. And for that matter, as we said before, we would like to start off talking with the experts that we have among us today. So I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to introduce Masego Motle. She comes from the National Film, Video and Sound Archives in South Africa. She holds a diploma in linguistic practice and archives and records management. And she's also in a master's in information science from the University of South Africa. She has 10 years of experience in the visual archiving sector, and she's currently working as Assistant Director of Film and Video Preservation at the National Film, Video and Sound Archives in South Africa. So hello from Tarifa Masego. We also have with us Cecilia Cenciarelli, who is responsible for the research and special projects department of the Cineteca di Bologna in Italy. She has worked as an archivist since 2000, and for example, she has overseen the digitalization and catalog of the Charlie Chaplin archive, and she is currently working on the archives of, among others, Bernardo Bertolucci. She has been part of the World Cinema Project since it was created in 2007, and she has helped protect and preserve more than 52 films from around the world. So hello, Cecilia. We also have with us Esteve Riambau. He's professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and she works for the audiovisual communication master. She has been the director of the Filmoteca de Catalunya since 2010, and he has been a member of the executive committee of the FCAT. He has co-directed the feature films, and he is the author of 40 volumes of film history. He has been awarded the Comillas Prize and the Ricardo Muñoz Suay Prize by the Spanish Film Academy, and he's been decorated by the French state as an officer of the Ordre des Arts et des Lettres. We also have with us, hello, as I was saying, we also have with us Stephanie Schulte-Strathaus. She is the artistic director of Arsenal in Berlin, where she has worked as a program director since the early 1990s. She was a part of the selection committee of the Berlinale, and also the firm expanded of the very same firm. She actually works on the film program exhibition as a part of the decolonization, and she's also a member of the board of the Masters of University, the Masters of Film Culture at the University of Jos in Nigeria. And she is member, as we said, of the board of the Harun Faraki. So I'd like to thank you for being here. Thank you to the experts, to the attendees, and to everyone who's making this festival possible. So without further ado, now we're going to start this debate. So my first question is for you, Cecilia, because I know that you have limited time. So we'd like to begin with South Africa, because we have an invited director who is Meli Sutando, and she suggested the film La Noirceur, and we know that the Cineteca di Bologna is very much committed to the restoration process. So how did this collaboration surge between these continents and South Africa? And also, maybe we could also talk, if you think that's fine, to talk about this. Do you think these plays are the only ones that can be restored due to the difficult conditions of the restoration of the heritage in general? What do you think? Thank you, Cecilia.
The interpreting channel is not working, or maybe I'm not using it right, but I think I understood everything you asked. That's the privilege of having Italian and Spanish. So thank you very much, and I'm really glad to be here with so many friends and colleagues. so this, if I understand well, you asked me to regroup a little bit how this project started and whether La Noire is it's as a classic film is important to be restored, to be disseminated, and yeah, that was the question more or less. So this project, the African Film Heritage Project that the La Noire is part of, kind of came about, stemmed from the work that we did with the World Cinema Project. So in 2007, we were partners with the Film Foundation to expand the work they've been doing for many years on American cinema, Italian cinema, British cinema especially, and the need of expanding the action, the restoration funding on their part was very strong, and we partnered in venturing into new filmographies. As Cineteca di Bologna, we've always been active in this territory, but clearly there's a funding opportunity there that makes your scope much larger. So of all the films we restored since 2007, it kept coming back that every time there was an African title coming up, being either a very well-known classic like La Noire 2 or Almumia, or especially not as much as Maghreb or the Middle East, but Central Africa, Western Africa, Southern Africa, we kept finding and we kept being confronted with the idea that the elements for restorations were never in Africa. This is something that was pretty obvious, and that follows the history of African cinema, in that in some part of Africa there was never a developing lab to develop this film. So clearly African filmmakers, as you know, most of them used to also study in Russian, but they would come to Italy or to France in the Francophone Africa to develop their films. So we decided to try to focus especially on African cinema, but one of the main concern of the Film Foundation was to launch a project on African cinema where we would select the films. They did not want to select the films to restore. They wanted to have a very strong African partner to select the films. So almost by chance, as we all go to festivals and try to build networks and relationship with others that do something similar to our concern, we got in touch with several members of the FCAT, the Pan-African Federation of African Filmmakers, which is the, as far as I know, the only really large federation of filmmakers in the world in existence, and very old, since 1969. And we started to work with them at this idea that they also had, Umar Sissoko, the current president of FEPASI, and Abubakar Sanogo, who I work with specifically with this project, had for many years the idea, and actually they started to make a sort of a survey of what was the condition in African archives, not just film, but also non-film and the heritage in general. So it was not our idea. It was obviously a shared need that we acted upon. And so it was decided that through the FEPACI, so it's not just filmmakers, but the scholars and journalists, they would select an initial number of 50 films to restore. We applied to UNESCO General History of Africa for extra support, not financial support, mostly like their knowledge on the general history of Africa. And so every time a project comes up, it comes up from their knowledge of the specific area, specific filmmakers, the state of the elements, the age of the filmmaker. Why not? Because we want to be able to pay tribute to some filmmakers that are maybe still with us, that they can have an input on the restoration, that they can be paid a tribute and be recognized for a long career. And so this is how it started, very simply by, and it's very slow. It's a very slow project, because one important thing is that around the restoration, there's an action of survey, an action of sort of gaining knowledge of the context of the other archives surrounded the film or the other titles of the film. So for almost every film we restored, we now know we're able to locate the majority of the other films of that filmmaker, know where the elements are. And I would love to extend this kind of, to make this public, to share this with the African archives, to share with this FCAT, and to share with all the other, film archives that might have an interest in supporting the need to take actions in any form, not just in restoring. Restoring takes lots of time and lots of funding, but there are various measures that can be applied. It's not just this is one. Preserving, of course, comes even earlier. But please stop me.
No hay problema, estamos bien de tiempo. Puedes continuar.
It's fine. We're on time. You can keep going.
La Noire 2 this year is Simban's anniversary, so the whole world wants to celebrate the genius of Simban. La Noire 2 was one of the first films that we restored with Barom Saret as well. We thought that it was going to be very easy to find the best element of La Noire 2, given that it's one of the most famous, most relevant film, considered, the father of African cinema, that we know that, there are other pioneers before, but the weight, the gravitas of Simban's work is exceptional as a groundbreaking pioneer. And I can tell you that it wasn't that easy to find the best element, even in France. So this made us, then eventually we did, but the history of laboratories and collections, especially in the transition between photochemical and digital, has been a tragic one, because for each laboratory that shuts down, there's a collection that was either part of the films developed in that laboratory or acquired at a second time. So for every laboratory that shuts down, there's a migration of a collection that, like, for all of us, sometimes has not been properly cataloged, sometimes has not been properly indexed. So every time a laboratory shuts down and this collection moves or is acquired, partially or just part of it, it's information that is scattered. And in this case, it's not our information, is a masterpiece of African cinema. So our point is that although there still might not be all of the conditions to make sure that these elements are stored in Africa, I think we should make sure that there is a map of where they are, and there is what I call, we talk about restitution, but it's a sort of moral restitution to allow those who operate in this field that might have the funding to actually access some really clear information, because this is not our heritage. So at least we should provide clear information as to where it is, also waiting for the day where it can hopefully go back to its continent. Anyway, La Noire 2, to make a long story short, we had to digitize it. We had to scan it in 4K twice, because we first thought we had the best elements. Again, this is France. And then we realized that was not the best element, because there was some missing information in the paperwork. So we had to scan it for a second time. It was scanned wet gate, because there was some, if I remember well, there was some incisions in the emulsion. So it was scanned wet gate. It was scanned in 4K. We work with Alain Simban, the son of Ousmane. We try to figure out the best way to make sure, once again, that this was not a Film Foundation, restoration or a Cinematographics restoration, that this was, it was FCAT coming up with the title that they cared about. And Lanoir is very, very popular, but it was really in need of restoration. But we restored other films that I wasn't familiar with, like Munamoto by Dikonge Pipa. We restore La Femme au Couteau by Timothy Bassori. They tried obviously to be also representative of the various countries and the diaspora countries. This is also something very important. We're probably going to move on to Mozambique and then go back in and out. We restore the Mambetis, Tukibuki, which is one of our blockbusters, as we call it. Sambinzanga was restored in very difficult conditions, and is been circulated in 85 countries around the world in the last year and a half. So it's very, we're very proud of it. And just to be really clear, the Film Foundation is a non-profit foundation. So all the revenues being commercial or non-commercial, so circulation in festivals or commercial in the release. So if the Criterion Collection releases it or Carlotta in France releases it, the revenues go back to the rights holder, the filmmakers, which in this case is most likely the filmmakers. So this is a very important point for us. We try to be an in-between hand to make this possible, lend our expertise or funding, but it's really, we try to be as a step back as possible. And because that's a whole other, that my colleague will probably have something to say, but that's a whole other subject that these filmmakers have rarely seen, a fair share of what these films have made, either because they have not circulated enough or because the rights of these films were acquired by other more wealthy distributors who were not always particularly fair with the revenue. So we that's also an element that comes in when you talk about restitution. They are the minds, and it's their vision, is their films. It's important that as small as those revenues might be, go back to them. Yes. I don't want to open too many subjects, and I don't want to talk too long, but I'm happy to answer other questions later.
Muchas gracias, Cecilia. Quisiera continuar con Masejo, aprovechando que
Thank you very
la
much,
historia de la
Cecilia. I'd like
institución es
to
muy
go on with
supervista, ¿no?
Masego,
Sabemos que se formó
because
como
the
un instituto
history
de
of
cine
your institution
sudafricano primero.
is very
Luego pasó a
interesting.
ser
It was
el
created
National
first
Film
as
Archive.
an
Ya en
institute
la
of
década de los 80 se
film,
incorporó
then
al
it
Servicio de
went
Archivos
to be
Estatales
the National
para
Film
finalmente
Archives, and in the 80s
constituirse
it
la
was
DSA.
incorporated into the
Entonces me
State
gustaría que nos
Archive
hablaras de cómo esa
department, and
evolución
now it has
ha
become what it is.
sido,
So I'd like you to talk to
ha ido
us
ganando,
about
en
the
esa evolución ha ido
evolution
ganando protagonismo
and
la gestión de archivos fílmicos
about
entre las necesidades
how
que
this
reconoce la
evolution
sociedad y el Estado
gained
sudafricano.
protagonism, and
Y por
how
supuesto,
we managed
cómo se ha ido
archives,
ampliando
and how the
el
society and the
catálogo
South African state
de
has recognized
recursos
and
a rescatar,
acknowledged the
archivos
need
fílmicos, pero
for
también
doing
archivos
good
de sonido y
archiving,
en
and
general
not only
archivos
about
audiovisuales.
restoring filmic archives, but also sound and audiovisual archives in general. Thank you. I think we have a connection issue.
Good morning, colleagues. No, it's not really a connection issue. I decided to switch off the video because I keep on getting refresh messages. So it's just for the benefit of me being able to respond to the question that was posed to myself. Okay, thank you so
It's fine,
much.
thank you.
Okay. So, I joined this beautiful organization, 10 years before, and already it was meshed into this big archive, in terms of collecting, preserving, and making available all the material that we have in-house. But I know that, with South Africa, a lot of our history comes back from the apartheid era and everything like that. So what the department has decided to do was, okay, let us go and now let us start to preserve the history of our country. So that is mainly most of what we collect as an organization, meaning that we collect and preserve everything that was made in or about the country itself. So they saw the importance of, let us have this in-house, let us make sure that it is well kept, let us make sure that people can use this type of material. So we had a couple of challenges as we go, as the technologies change, in terms of how do we make this material of ours accessible to the country at large and all our researchers, because most of the time our clientele is researchers. You'll find that we have students, or we'll find that we have families that have discovered that, one of the family members had actually been a filmmaker of a particular film and then is kept there at the National Archives. So our mandate at this point is also to, with using the Legal Deposit Act, to request that all producers and filmmakers in the country must deposit whatever they have to the institution for us to make it accessible and for us to ensure that it's kept for future generations. So in terms of our organization, we are also trying, even though, budget is always an issue, a problem when it comes to archiving. We have been lucky, just after the COVID, we were able to get a presidential stimulus package, where we had a project where we got funding to do some digitization of what we have in-house. So, in our country, we don't really have equipment. Everything needs to be manufactured and shipped from abroad. So we managed to get half of the digitization workflow, meaning we at least got the inspection tables, we got more viewing tables, because the ones that we had are non-operational in the country. We don't have anybody to service this type of missions. So we ended with the film washing machine. Now we are busy in the process of trying to digitize our material so that we are able to let the public see this, because sometimes you are stuck here with film reels and there is no playback equipment. So what we're doing now is that we are now in talks of trying to get the rest of the workflow so that we are able to have digital copies in our repository so that we make it available, because what is preservation without access? So that is what we are trying to do, to get our material out there and be seen by everybody who's supposed to see. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a ti, Macejo. Continuamos con
Thank you very
Esteban.
much, Masego.
Esteban, la Filmoteca
Now we
Nacional
move on to
el último destino para las
Esteban.
películas.
So the Filmoteca is supposed to be the final destination for movies, isn't it? And also as a mausoleum of images, but currently new technologies and cultural changes have allowed for the film libraries to preserve them and to give them a second life. So I'd like you to comment on this. First, do you agree with that statement? And second of all, how do these multiple changes affect the film libraries when approaching people?
Concerning this question, I think that cinema has been changed from the beginning. So the dynamic process, it's not a mausoleum, as you said. So film archives, we are moving in parallel to this evolution of techniques of cinema. And in fact, the reason of the rise of the first film archives was in the 30s because some people, some pioneers realized that all the cinema from the silent period was lost. So they tried to recover what remains. Now, I think we are not in a so dramatic situation, but I think that digital has been changed everything, not only the filmmaking, but also the preservation. And this adds new problems about the preservation of the heritage. And concerning the archives, it had made a lot of work for us to adapt to a new situation. Of course, not replacing the preservation of a film in a photochemical support, but creating new devices to preserve the new productions in just in digital form. And that for archives in Africa or in Asia or in Latin America is an additional problem, because it's not just a matter of preserve or store cans in a place with a low temperature, which is not yet in the same quality in the archives, but to create new devices more expensive than the previous one. I calculate the cost of the preservation of a film, and in a digital way, it costs 6 times more than in photochemical way. I told that to Beatrice de Paz, the head of CNC archives in Paris, and she said, "You're right, but I also did the calculation, and not 6 times, but 10 times more expensive." So that means for the new productions, you mentioned before the fragility of celluloid. Celluloid is the most strong support to preserve films, not the most fragile. It's very most fragile digital, and not speak about the intermediate period with the magnetic tapes and so on. So it's a big effort in order to preserve that. And we were, all of us, we were in Mexico 10 days ago in the FIAF Congress, and there have been a lot of changes in the EC, in the perspective of the future for the archives around the world. The next Congress will be in Thailand. But I made a very simple calculation, and I realized that among 94 FIAF members, that meaning that they have their own archives, there are just 2 in Africa. One is Mercedes Model Institution, who organized also the Congress in 2011, and the other is Cinematographics in Morocco, in Rabat. And among the associates, there are 79 in the whole, and there are just 7 in Africa. That means there is very few institutions able to preserve film materials in Africa. We started speaking about restoration, which is very good, and the work of Cinematographics Colonial is very interesting, but I think that before restoration, we must assure the preservation. The preservation of African patrimony is very complicated. Not only because, and I finish with that, because it's a very huge subject, and not only with the preservation in local archives in Africa, but also what happens with materials or films from Africa preserved in European or American archives, and the idea to return these materials to the original places if they can assure their conditions to be preserved. And I finish with that because I think it's a huge subject to be discussed.
Gracias, Esteban. Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Stefan.
Conocemos muy bien el trabajo que
Stephanie,
hace el Arsenal
we
de
move
Bibliotecas y
on now to you. We know very well the work
archivos
that
también.
Arsenal does, that your
Sin
team
duda el
does
material
to preserve the archives and
rescatado
restore them
del
too.
Chinese Film
So
Group
without the shadow of a doubt,
solo
the
para
material that
todos
you
los
got from
bibliotecarios
the Sudanese group is very valuable, not
Entonces,
only for the
sabemos
Sudanese
que en ese
people, but
sentido
for the African
el
continent as a
patrimonio
whole.
también
We
es
know that
libre
in that
explorar, es un
sense,
ejercicio de poder
heritage
definir qué
is an exercise
queremos
of
contar.
power,
¿Me podrías
and we
decir
have to
cómo es
define
ese proceso de
what
creación
story
de
we
un
want to
film?
tell.
Como,
Could you
por
please
ejemplo,
tell
con
us
ese dilema
how
de
this
qué es
process
lo que
works
conservamos y qué
for you? How do you face the situation of what we have to restore and what we don't have to restore? Thank you.
Stephanie, perdona. Tu micrófono está silenciado.
I know.
Gracias.
3
Your
years
mic is
of
not on,
Zooming.
Stephanie, sorry.
I know. 3 years of Zooming. Still making the same mistakes. Sorry. I basically said thank you for having me, and I think it would be helpful if I give a little background information about our institution that explains why we do what we do and especially how we do it. The Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art is turning 60 this year, and covers several activities such as the Berlinale Forum, a section of the Berlin Film Festival that we are running independently as part of Berlinale. We have our own cinema, we have a distribution and an archive. And the idea of the forum as an independent section, Berlinale, founded in 1971, was from the beginning on to make German subtitled prints of the films that were shown from all over the world, which means to produce extra prints that stayed with us for distribution in German-speaking countries. And then decades later, of course, digitization became an issue and the prints were aging. We were never really considered an archive that would preserve. It was more really only for distribution and curating. But then the problem that we faced around 2000 was that the archive is an international archive and funding is usually there for national film heritage. So we had to be creative to get funding to restore our films, to find other ways as part of projects. You have some curatorial artistic projects that you get funding for, and for those projects you have to digitize or restore a film, so to kind of find a way to do it indirectly. That meant that we opened up the archive for researchers and to help them with their projects. And many of them then found out that discovered films that they had been looking for all over the world, and they were obviously lost, and then they found copies in our archive. And only through those users of our archive, we really learned about the amount of films that we have that have only survived in our archive. And then, of course, we have a different kind of responsibility. Our history is based on showing films from all over the world. And it turns out they are now, they survived in our archive. So now we really have to give back. But of course, also every digitization restoration project that you do, and some of them then got funding from the Foreign Office in Germany, have to take place in collaboration with the respective partners. It could be filmmakers, producers, but in some cases also, I don't know, like institutions like Inca and Guinea-Bissau, or, and so you have a network and you collaborate. And it was always clear from the beginning on that the films come from our archive. Oftentimes they have German subtitles, which is an issue, plus the funding comes from Germany. So we very quickly learned that that it's not only about the film itself, it's also about how we work together, how we collaborate. And so one of our decisions from very early on was to write all the grants in 2 languages so that our partners are involved from the beginning on and know exactly where the money comes from and how it's going to be spent. it's also about the rights, so that we always said, okay, one thing is the film, that's easy to give it back. I mean, it's not easy. It's, as we heard a couple of times, expensive, and but still, it's technically possible to have 2 digital prints and or to decide where the analog material goes. And so this was always clear that films go back, and something can also, of course, stay with us. But the more important issue is the rights. So although we oftentimes had the distribution rights for decades, we clearly said that in such cases, well, the rights are with you, they stay with you completely. We are not asking for rights only because we are getting the funding, but what we can offer is a distribution contract, because through our network and through our institution and the distribution side of it, we can support the film after the restoration to make it public worldwide. And so that's usually how we work together. But this is where we are now. But in the last 10, 15 years, we have been collaborating with so many partners that we really, and I think this is the main issue, learned from project to project from our partners. And it's in every project you work on, you have new challenges and you learn from them. And I think the most important thing is to learn to be very flexible, that there is no, right and wrong. Every case is different. Sometimes you have to work very closely with ministries, like, for example, in Nigeria, we have a very good relationship with the director of the NFC and the ministry, and this is very crucial and important, whereas in other countries, it's very different. You have to be sometimes very careful with whom you work, or you have, like in our collaboration with Guinea-Bissau over a period of 10 years, we had 3 coups d'etat. So you never know who is now in charge, who do you work with or not. So this is just one example of how important flexibility is. And I think the most important aspect is transparency. You always need partners, and you always have to negotiate with them how this specific collaboration could work. And then very soon you understand it's not only about the films. Again, it's also about supporting infrastructures. For instance, like in the case, maybe to give you like 2 little examples that have been moments where I really learned a lot. One was that, for example, a film that we showed in the Berlinale Forum, a Portuguese film. I don't speak, forgive my pronunciation, Acto dos Feitos da Guiné, by Fernando Matos Silva. The film was, I think, in the early 80s, 81 or so, in the Forum. And Filipa Cesar, a Portuguese artist, researched our archive, found this film, and she discovered in the film images that she knew from other films that she had seen in the archive of Inca in Guinea-Bissau, films by Flora Gomes and Chris Makea. And so she found out this connection, and those films had been lying there for decades in very bad shape. So we started a long collaboration with her and the filmmakers and Inca to digitize this material in Berlin and then bring it back. But the point is, in this case, that our film, which was the starting point for this collaboration, is now, it's still in our archive, but it's now a different film, because it now exists in the context of the Guinea-Bissau archive, which changes our view on our own film. And that's, I think, is very important, that our archives all belong together. There is one big worldwide archive that we are all working on. So we have to support each other in any possible way and share structures, share whatever we can share, because it's not only about the African archives, it's at the same time also about ourselves and our own learning processes and the way we contextualize our own films. Another example, before I finish, is a phone call that I got from Didi Cheka from Nigeria in Lagos Film Society in 2015. He had heard about our collaborations, and he told me about films that he found in the former colonial the space of the former colonial film unit. When he was looking for, he wanted to open a cinema space for Lagos Film Society, so he got access through the Goethe Institute, and then found like many films there, and he called me and he was like, can you help us digitizing them? And then I said, you know, I don't know, when next time you come to Berlin, bring 2 reels. And we looked at them, they looked really like in super bad shape, like they were obviously lost. And I said to him, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And then Didi said to us, but if this is true, he would suggest a project based on oral history. He invited us to find the people who made the films or saw the films and reconstruct the entire archive based on their stories. And I thought this was brilliant because this is also restoration. Yeah, this is to really, it's not just the material, it's also everything that is around the film. So we went to Nigeria. We had from the Guinea-Bissau project a little device to, like we call it our first aid kit, to an unwinder to look at the films. And it turns out while we were there that the majority of that archive had been brought much earlier to Jos, to the Nigerian Film, Video and Sound Archive, where they have a vault and much better conditions. So we went there and found more or less the same films in better shape. And also reels of a very important film that everybody knew about, but nobody had ever seen, Shehu Umar, by Adamu Halilu, a film from 1976, which is based on a short story by the first Prime Minister of Nigeria, Tafawa Balewa, a story from 1955. And this film was disappeared right after it was finished. And so we found elements there and decided to make a restoration. And this was the big breakthrough in our collaboration. The next step was the installment of a scanner, so that in the future projects, the digitization would not necessarily have to be done in Europe. And then the next step was in collaboration with Frankfurt University, Vincent Sediger, who came with us on one of our journeys to Nigeria. He managed to, he had developed a master program at the University in Frankfurt on film archiving and curating. And with funding of the DAAD, German Academic Exchange Funding, he managed to, we all together in collaboration with NFC and the archive and the University of Jos were able to establish a master program at the University of Jos in curating and archiving. And since then, we have an ongoing exchange program. Like there is a program called Training the Trainers. So the people who work in the archive or the university get training in Frankfurt and in Berlin. We also travel there, but we also, again, like goes both ways, invite guests, colleagues from Nigeria for projects, for example, in the context of our upcoming festival archival assembly. So that's more or less, it's all about collaboration, and it's all about going case by case and being flexible, which is not always easy for Western institutions to stay flexible.
Gracias, Stephanie. Sin duda, la flexibilidad ha sido un tema recurrente.
Thank you very much. Flexibility is a recurrent topic, isn't it? In other contexts, not only in this one here. So now I'd like to move on to some common threads, and maybe we could exchange opinions regarding some subjects or topics that are relevant to us during today's meeting. The first topic I'd like to suggest is the restitution. I know that you have given us some hints, but I'm going to read a fragment of a newspaper that I found where it stated that 90% of the cultural heritage in Africa is out of the African continent. It's a study carried out in 2018 by the French government to a Senegalese economist. He's called Farouin Sarr, and the a historian, one historian also supported the project. So my question is, what are the strategies to be able to overcome these issues and move on to less catastrophic numbers? And how can film libraries and archives help to solve this issue? Thank you. So whoever wants to start, feel free to take the floor. Thank you.
There are single and specific case, and you must be very careful dealing with each one of them. And in our case, I did a parallel experience in a project, a European project, helping Morocco in order to develop political, audiovisual politics and preservation with France and Italy. And we realized that they have a lot of Pathé journal new reels concerning Morocco in the Moroccan Cinematheque. And they start to digitalize that, thinking that because it was shot in Morocco, it belongs to them. And I said, sorry, but it's not true. It belongs to Pathé. I'm very sorry, but things are like this. So before to start working with material, you must deal with Pathé. It's not you will not be able to do anything. And the other parallel story is that we have a very nice experience restoring and recovering Moroccan film called Turkish Cinematographics by Mustafa Derkawi. And the film left Morocco, not by colonial reasons, but because of the censorship of their country. And they went to Madrid with 16 negative material in order to have a copy in 35 millimeters to be shown in Europe in different festivals. In the lab in Madrid, they say, we are not doing this, you must go to the same lab, but in Barcelona. They arrive here, the lab produces the copy in 35 millimeters. The single copy circulates in several festivals, not too much. But then the film was banned in Morocco. It just circulated in VHS, very much quality copies, and the film was absolutely forgot in the archives of this lab in Barcelona until it bankrupt in the 1998. And after several years, all these materials came to the Filmoteca de Catalunya. So the film was in our vaults, and then researchers from France, Morocco, Léa Morin, came asking about this material, and we said we have the material, they're in very good condition, and we can start the process of restoration and digitalization. And we did that. The film was released, thank you, Stephanie, in the Berlinale Forum in 2019. And then there it was the chief of the Centre National du Cinéma Marocain. And he says this film must return to Morocco. Now it's no more censorship, okay? And the film was traveling in 2 weeks from Berlin to the Moroccan Film Festival in Tangier with the filmmaker and with all their colleagues, and it was very, 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 very touching. And the film started circulating in Morocco and other festivals. We have the materials. We are the owners of the materials because the legal decision of the judge dealing with the laboratory, but now the commercial rights of the film belong to the filmmaker, to his family, and they just publish a book and a DVD, and the film is available everywhere. So it's a specific case with a very happy ending. Not all the endings are so happy, but I think it's very important to know exactly to whom belongs the film, where the materials are. As Cecilia said before, what are the best materials in order to work and to invest in order to have a new digital copy. So I think it's very difficult to generalize and to make general statements about this subject because it's very complicated and with very specific details in every case. But we must try it. That's the most important.
I may add just one point to make it a little bit more. I may add just one point to make it a little bit more complicated. In cases, for example, where I mean, this is all based on the idea that of authorship, that the filmmaker or the production owns the image or the film, but what about the image itself? And like the example that I spoke about in Guinea-Bissau, where we have a film in our archive and Portuguese films that has images taken from another archive, then the question of ownership becomes really complicated, and then it's really it has to be. It's very often then also like you also gave this example of the Pathé films that were shot somewhere, but it's clearly Pathé films, but it doesn't maybe the fact that they were shot somewhere else. Oh, I must say I had some audio problems, so I'm not sure if I understood correctly. But the fact that they were shot somewhere else, does it maybe also create some kind of ownership of the image of a place or of people? I think it's that again, like once again, I say it's which what you also said, it's really a case by case decision making. I think it's very important to have something like a maybe to discuss and over again something like a code of ethics or so, and then to really negotiate case by case. Yeah.
Can I also add a little thing? I'm sorry, I had connection problems just before. I've heard Esteban and Stephanie talk about words like responsibility, transparency, ethics, those, and flexibility. Those, I'd like to reiterate, are really at the core of what we do. And I think that restoring, as Esteban said, restoration, we're talking about restoration, therefore that's at the moment we're focusing on that. But Esteban very rightly said that preservation comes before, and it's something that we do routinely. Unfortunately, being a European archive, an African archive, our governments do not really put the right attention to preservation. So sometimes the one film you restore that becomes a case study where you attract a new audience, a new interest, where you have circulation, when you have a sense of recontextualize how that film was made and in which time period, so this discourse becomes sort of radiates from that film. Sometimes that really helps helps promoting, endorsing the necessity of preservation, because sometimes the one film that comes out and travels and hits some really important points can actually pave the road to some other actions that are less visible but equally, if not more, necessary. Anyway, all those words that have been said really resonate with me as well, with what is done. They're definitely, and transparency needs to be applied to every step of the process. Transparency in terms of kind of deals you make, what kind of arrangements you have, who's the authorship, who's the moral author, but also in terms of the process of restoration, because as Esteban said, cinema has always been transforming, and the machines, the equipments, the processes, our eyes, the theaters have always been transforming. The way we hear now in a theater is different. So there's so many questions to take into account that it's important to document your process, because it's definitely not the final one. It's our own best educated array of choices given philological research, everything we know, but it's still our own choices. There's nothing officially the best and the last restoration work. So if you are able to make it reversible, if you're able to let a door open for those who will come after us and maybe discover something else, and you make it transparent as a process, that is also an act of responsibility in a way.
Ciertamente la responsabilidad es compartida y es un tema que hay que ver
Yes,
caso a
you
caso.
have a shared responsibility too.
Macego, no sé si
And
tienes
we have
alguna
to do case by
reflexión
case,
sobre
of
esto o
course.
sobre cómo ha sido el trabajo
Masego,
desde tu
I don't
inicio
know if you'd
institucional
like to
con el
comment on
tema de los
something
derechos.
regarding how you have been working within your institution regarding the rights, for example.
Creo que no nos está escuchando, Macejo.
I am here, so
Okay.
excuse me for that.
Masego,
I
can you
am
hear
here,
us?
so excuse me for that. I'm used to using Teams, that Zoom, so I was looking for the unmute button, but yeah, here goes. So with us, in terms of, you know, we haven't come across any film that is not made in South Africa. So in terms of repatriation, perhaps somebody has something from us, and I think that's where transparency comes in. So we should be alerted by that. But in terms of the rights, because we have so many people who would like to use or reuse some of the elements that were made before. So with us, it's very important for us to get the copyright holder before we can give anything out of our archival institution. So luckily, we've got like a database of the people who actually deposit into our archive. So at least we are able that when there's a new filmmaker who wants to remake or add some parts of a particular film that is made or that is kept with us, we are able to provide you with contact details of the copyright holder. Sometimes it goes very easy where you just need to give the person credit, but it will also depend on who has the rights to the particular production. Thanks.
Sí, es verdad. Pero es también grato escuchar que hay mucho interés de parte de
It is true, but it
propietarios
is very
de
pleasant to
entregar
hear
estos
that
archivos. Imagino
many
que no
people
solamente
are
son
interested
personas
in
creadores,
handing
digamos,
in those
de
archives.
sino
And I
también gente
imagine
común y
that we're
corriente, que
not
tu trabajo
only
también
talking
alcance
about
a la
creators
población general.
and directors, but also common people, because your work is actually reaching them, right?
That's correct. That's correct. We have, you know, that's correct. That's correct. We have, you know, just common people who are very much interested in whatever we have. You know, sometimes you find out things that you were not even aware of that would make you want to create your own, you know, a moving images. So it's quite a very interesting part when it comes to our job, because it's not only about, that's why I keep on saying as much as preservation is very vital, it is also great that people are able to use whatever that we have from our archive. So yeah, even general people are now starting to create their own from what we have.
Esteban, ¿querías compartir algo?
Yes, no, I think that concerning the
Stephen, did you
rights,
want to say something?
all of us, we are public institutions, but all of us, we are dealing with private owners of the films that we store. So it's always a balance between the commercial interest of the owners and the public interest of our institutions. In our case, every single euro that we invest on the restoration or the preservation of a, film owned by a private owner, in exchange, we ask for cultural rights in order that this public money invested can be returned to the society who's paying the taxes to have an institution as ours. So, for instance, in the case of the Moroccan film I mentioned before, we store the materials. The materials are ours because the legal decision of the judge about the laboratory. But immediately when the owner appear, all the commercial rights are for them. And they sold the film to a distributor, to TVs, anything. But the circulation of this film in cultural cinemas or in fee of archive, so on. It belongs to us because we invest public money in that. So I think the deal is very clear. We have no problems about that.
Perfecto. Gracias, Esteban, por compartir tu reflexión. Estamos ya abriendo
Thank you very
el
much,
espacio para
Stefan, for
preguntas
sharing your thoughts. So now we're opening up the debate and the question and answer session with our attendees, the members of the public. I don't know if somebody wants to share something with us, maybe? Here I've got one question for you.
Dice, gracias por este seminario. Onaney Gómez Álvarez.
Thank you for this webinar.
Se le podrá dar desde el
Agonay
punto de
Gomez
vista de la
Alvarez. My
memoria
question
a
is,
un autor,
what
autora
answer could we give from the institution to an author, to an African author that wants to preserve his or her film today? Do we have regional or global initiatives to provide them with support as for today? Thank you.
Cecilia.
Creo que sí, nos habla.
Should I go?
Claro, Stephanie, puedes
Should I
comenzar.
go? Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. You were mentioning filmmakers, but there are also many others who we call, this was actually something that Didi Chika invented, the term accidental archivists, people who stumble over films somewhere that are not properly archived and don't know what to do with them because they don't have the professional background or networks. And so those accidental archivists, we are soon publishing a book about that. But also filmmakers, of course, who have their own films with them and look for a place for them. I think they really need networks. They need to know whom to address, where to find help. And this should not only be, again, like on the European side, because there are already some places and infrastructures on the continent of Africa. So it's very much about networking, providing networks. And we are currently working on a website to make that happen, to connect those accidental archivists or filmmakers, whoever is has to deal with or is dealing with analog film material and doesn't know where to go, to connect those with others who are already more institutionalized, who do have maybe proper storage facilities or scanner, like, for example, the Cinematech in Cairo, Cinematech Alternative Film Center is at the moment in a really very close, already has really good facilities, but they're still being improved. And so I think this is very important, so that to provide access to information. Like Cecilia said already in the beginning, it's also about information where what is. But it's also about where you find structures or potential support or advice or whatever you need in a specific case. And I think this is the most important thing. So this website will go online soon. It's a very small project. So we hope it will grow very fast and people can provide all the information they have. So that also a filmmaker who wants to know where to put his or her film material can hopefully find an answer. Oops.
Tengo otra pregunta, una pregunta para Macejo.
I have another question.
Con el final de la
Question for Masego. Here it says, with the ending of apartheid in South Africa, how your institution have participated in the rewriting of the memory and the heritage, because these films were not representative of all of the parts of the country.
Thank you so much for the question. Can you just repeat? Thank you so much for the question. Can you just repeat the middle part? How is my institution doing what?
Sí, ¿cómo ha participado su institución en la reescritura de la memoria?
how your institution represented and worked on the recreation of the memory in a country in which had privileged a cinema that was not representative of all the sectors of the population in South Africa.
I'm so sorry to be that guy. I'm so sorry to be that guy. Can you just repeat it last time? I just want to get to understand it.
Hay una narrativa que, por supuesto, está tratando de reconstruirse a partir de un periodo colonial.
There is a narrative that is trying to be rebuilt after a decolonization process that dispossessed the history of Africa. So how your institution has contributed to overcome these difficulty? I mean, what have been the biggest challenges for in your institution in terms of dealing with this?
Okay, I'm not sure if I did understand the question, but I'm just gonna try. I'm not sure if I did understand the question, but I'm just gonna try to respond to that question to the best of my ability. Although I did mention that most of our collection is mainly focusing on the era, it doesn't really mean that entirely our holdings is about that. Our holdings is also about celebrations of the new era, where we have documented things like your Freedom Day. We've got Freedom Day footages. We also have the treason trial. We had I'm moving to sound now. We had treason trial dicta belts that were kept here in our organization, and we did a very major event with INA, the French Institute, where we took our dicta belts to France and we got them digitized, and families of the people who were part of the trial were invited to come now and listen to this original recordings of this particular trial. So we were trying in a way to show that although we went through whatever that we went through, we still come back to document new things. We also document especially now this is May, it's Africa Month. We document Africa Month celebrations. So there's funding given by there's funding given by our department to filmmakers to try and recreate or retell the story that it didn't end there before 1994, but post 1994 there were great things that really actually happened into the country. So there are new filmmakers that funded by the same department to try and tell the story of our freedom. So I think that is how we contributed as an institution to try and show that, even if it was dark, but there was always light at the end of the tunnel. So I hope I was able to respond to that question. But if I was not, maybe they can just ask a follow-up question and I will answer better.
Has podido responder, no te preocupes, Macejo.
You were able to answer my question. Thank you very much.
¿Tenemos más preguntas de nuestro público?
Do we have more questions from our attendees? Just give me 1 second. I'm going to check the chat box. We've had a really interesting debate in this round table during the Palaver tree regarding technologies in the African Film Festival of Tarifa. There is a certain dispute, I'd say, when we've had the conversations regarding analog and digital. What are the advantages and disadvantages of every aspect of it? But in this conversation, it is clear that we need to be flexible and we need to have a dialogue between both formats. So I'd like to ask you,
facilidades y
What
dificultades que
have
trae
been
lo digital en su trabajo.
the
Ah,
main
un formato que
difficulties
todavía
in
estamos
your work
descubriendo, ¿no?
as
Celuloide
a
tiene más de 100
format,
años con nosotros, pero
as
es
we are still
algo
discovering, because
relativamente
celluloid
nuevo.
has been with us for more than 100 years, but the digital format is quite new, isn't it? So what have been the difficulties for you?
¿Alguien quisiera comenzar? Cecilia.
Who wants to start? Cecilia, maybe?
So as Esteban already mentioned it a little bit,
Ujú.
there's no real dichotomy as such between the digital and the photochemical. We need to have, I always think we need to have a photochemical brain or way of thinking to work at the best in the digital world. We need to know how to handwrite to use the computer. We can't just learn the computer. There's a whole process that used to go into the photochemical restoration that need to be carried into the digital restoration. As this is a very debated, highly debated issue for many years now. The fact that technology is becoming so performing, so powerful, that one of our challenges, in fact, to make sure that we are controlling all this potential, that we are handling the technology and the technology is not showing us where to go. We need to be really clear as to what we want to achieve, because technology today can be used in an automated way, can be used to flatten everything. We are used more and more also with the apparati, like our televisions and everything, to see everything perfectly smooth, perfectly flat, perfectly contrasted and black and white, and colors are all. This is not what we do. This is not our job. So our job is to know, that black and white from the Nouvelle Vague was different than black and white from neorealism, and to know why, and to know what it means. So if we can put oral knowledge into the digital world, this is from the restoration process point of view. But if we're thinking about preservation, again, I'm referring to Esteban's before. Yes, film is a very fragile medium, but yes, the 35 millimeter stock that we know preserved in the right conditions can last for more than a century. We do not know how long those LTOs that we are, in an ideal world, when you restore a film, you have both the digital backup, which need to be refreshed. So LTO is your your system, and then in an ideal world, when a restoration is well funded, you produce a new internegative and you have a new print for preservation. So what's gonna be. How long is that gonna last? You don't know about the LTOs. You don't know if in 10 years you've refreshed accurately, you still be able to read it. So there's a big question mark on technology. We try to be as updated as possible. We try to be very sensitive. We try to. It's very, as Esteban said, it's very expensive, but we do know how print works. So we always need to be aware of all these complexities. Our work, our job is, I think, most of it, be aware of the complexities, being cultural, being procedural in terms of the actual practice of restoration. Complexity is the center of our job, and it's enriching to know that there's never the right answer. It's actually a good place to be, a place with no certainties but a lot of considerations. It's something that makes our job better, not easier, but better, deeper.
To be
Yeah.
even more specific, I think there is no debate between photochemical and digital. Digital is a reality coming from the industry for commercial purpose. And as an archivist, what we must do is to adapt to this new reality. For us, it's very uncomfortable because, as I said before, and Cecilia said now, photochemical support has the guarantee to be preserved for years. We have no guarantee about the preservation of the digital systems. Now we know that it's more expensive than photochemical, but it's the reality. So we cannot ignore ignore these new materials. But I am sure that in the future, as it happens with the origins of cinema in the beginning of 20th century, some of the production of this beginning of a digital era will be lost, or we will be enabled to reproduce with new devices that will be incompatible with the original form. So what we can do is to store all this production in a super high computer, cross the fingers, and wait and see. Nothing else we can do. And the proof is that when we restore a film with digital media, immediately we produce a negative in 35 millimeters, but we are sure that this is the future for the film, the future of the preservation. For the people interested in this subject, please read the Digital Dilemma, a wonderful text written by the Motion Picture Archive 15 years ago. And that is all. That is everything. Digital is an excellent way to spray, to disseminate, to share, but not to be preserved. But since there is just this new support, what we do, we preserve as we can, paying a lot of more money with photochemical, and translating this debate to African archives. The problem is even higher than before, because before you said, what does a filmmaker with his film? Are there enough African archives available to guarantee the preservation of not only the photochemical but the digital new productions? This is the main question.
Sorry, two very quick things. I agree with the step, but I also agree that there are some positive aspects in the digital. He said, as you know, in the distribution, yes, but for instance, restoring some African cinema, knowing that the films can go pretty easily back to their countries and be seen in a much vaster way. This is also a positive element. And you know, in restoration, it does offer opportunities that we didn't have before for restoration. But I agree, it's a very complex matter. But I wanted to give you a tiny example about what I was saying before that I forgot to mention before. Three, I don't remember, years ago, we restored Vittorio De Sica's Miracolo a Milano, 1951, I believe. The film ends with a scene with people flying on a broom, right? So when we're restoring, we see that the chords were very visible. Were very visible, the way he made his characters fly. And so we had a long internal debate, as to how much we need, because now with the digital restoration, you really are able to see, it was an original camera negative. So you see the people's skins in a different way. So it is a very rich to have a 4K scan of a black and white original negative. It's you see things you haven't seen before, even if you restore it for a chemical. So these chords became even more visible. So we had a long, very interesting debate that lasted more than a day as to what to do, because we didn't want to erase this sign. We knew if De Sica was alive, he would have asked to erase, like it happened to us before, of filmmakers being there during the restoration and asking to improve what they couldn't do at the time, because for sure the CICA didn't want the score to be seen at the time. There's no debate about that. But what about all the people that saw the films, you know, for half a century and saw those little lines, which are part of the art, you know, the craft in which cinema was made. And so we came to the conclusion that we needed to leave it as it was. So we just dim it enough to mimic what it was in 35 millimeter, not to make it even more visible, but it was a very good learning experience, because we actually sat around the table and, you know, brought evidence and other cases and debated, and it was a good learning experience. This kind of debates need to happen, even if it's not as famous of a film or as famous as a filmmaker as the CICA. They need to happen. This kind of dilemmas need to happen with every film that you do. It's really important to ask yourselves questions in the process.
Claro que sí, considerar ahí los riesgos de la descontextualización.
Of course it is. We have to take into account the decontextualization. Well, we are reaching the end of this meeting. And just to close this session, maybe as the ending words, I would like to ask a question from Carlota. What would be the main ideas that you want to leave on preservation, on audiovisual heritage? What are the main ideas, heritage, that you want to leave?
Stephanie, tal vez tú quieras dejar alguna reflexión final.
Stephanie, maybe you want to start or do a final conclusion or final comment?
Very big question. This is a very, very big question. It's pretty much maybe a summary. I think it's pretty much maybe a summary of most of what we have said during the session, which I think it's very important to always be clear about the fact that we are living in a present, and that everything we do is done from that perspective. And so we have to understand that and this is also like we are also of course living like always in political times. So I think it's important with archives and also all the discussions around the notion of heritage to be aware that this is not just about preservation and restoration, but that those are that this is about social and political interactions. And so we have to consider archive work as a practice, a political practice, and I think, and a learning practice. I think this is, and only then I think we can really work with the heritage, which when we are aware of this and take responsibility for all those questions that we have discussed and many more.
Gracias a ti. Macejo, ¿quisieras dejar alguna reflexión final?
Thank you. Masego, a final comment, maybe?
Yes, thank you, of course. Yes, thank you, of course. Especially when I'm gonna go back a bit when we were talking about the last topic, I am very much in agreement with my colleagues. You see, when it comes to archival work, we do really need to follow the times. Unfortunately, it's the reality of things. But young as I am, I would like to say, let us take care of our analog material, make sure that they are well preserved, because should in any way we lose the digital forms that we created, we can always go back to the original and make another digital. So it is important for us to also make the archives known. Let us take the archives to the people. Let us network as much as possible. Let us share ideas. Let us make sure that when we attend webinars, when we attend conferences, congresses, festivals, let us make sure that we always preach archival work. That is why we are so much indebted in our outreach programs. Archives Week, we do promotions for our institution, so that a lot of people know and are aware that there is such great institutions that keeps such great uh, materials that can be used by everyone. Even I'm 33 years old, but I know for sure that my 5-year-old daughter will one day be able to see and to understand as the world and as a country where we come from and where we are going. Those are my closing statement. I'm going to switch on my video so that you see me for the last time. Thank you.
Gracias a ti, Masejo. Cecilia.
Thank you, Masego.
Well, there's very little to add. I very much agree with Stephanie. Sometimes we say it's almost a militant, it's a militant mission, depending on what your country is going through. There are moments where you really feel it's a militant mission because the country, it doesn't have the best government, the government you wish for, like we do right now. I just want to say something very simple. Let's not forget that we also do all of this so that we can gather in front of us a big screen. Let's never forget the big screen. Let's try to keep that experience really alive by the source of our work. Let's make sure that we have that as a common with all the other ways of disseminating our films. We are okay with, but let's remember that we want to make sure that more generations will find that enlightening and inspiring as we did. It's very important. It's vital. We see so many cinemas shutting down in Italy, becoming malls or telephone shops, or it's heartbroken. Let's keep the community. Let's raise a community of cinephile from when they are 5, like Masego's daughter. Let's raise them to see. Let's not be afraid to challenge our audiences. And if we do when they're really young, they will grow up being able to understand what it's ugly and what it's beautiful. It's about exercising your eyes and your thinking and your critical mind, because it's part of that to be in front of a work of art that's also such a large entertainment industry. Is about being able to tell the difference. We need to raise our new generations being able to tell the difference between what they're fed automatically and what they could aspire to. So let's raise our bar higher and try to keep that alive.
Muchas gracias. Esteban.
I think
Thank you very much,
almost
Esteban.
has been said, but just to say that don't think that digital is the solution and everything is available online on platforms and so on. I think that preservation is most necessary than ever, and to preserve the heritage of our countries is the only way to ensure the diversity, the history, and the qualities of human beings along the story of the 20th and 21st century. That's all.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, de esta forma damos cierre a nuestro webinar y también al ciclo de conversaciones.
Thank you very much. This is then the end of this webinar and to the debate that we have originated from the Palaver tree in this African Film Festival of Tarifa. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. If you are following us here in Tarifa, the program keeps going. It's not the end of it, and we have many more activities to share with you in person. And for those of you who are online, I'd like you to tell you that we're going to share these conversations so you can have a look at them afterwards. So that's everything from my side. Thank you very much, and I wish you a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.